Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to the English Globe, a place where we explore important global topics using clear, calm, and simple English so that you can improve your listening skills while also understanding how the world works. And today, we are beginning a new educational discussion that focuses on how global power is understood in the modern world, why the idea of a world superpower has changed so much in recent years, and how countries now compete through influence, economics, technology, and diplomacy, rather than only through traditional military strength.
Thank you, Adam. And a warm welcome from me as well to everyone listening around the world, because this episode is especially important for English learners who want to understand international news without fear or confusion, since many headlines talk about powerful countries, global competition, or rising tensions, but they often do not clearly explain what power really means today, how it is measured, or why it affects ordinary people's lives through trade, technology, jobs, education, and even the information we see every day.
Before we go deeper into today's topic, we would kindly ask you to support the English Globe by liking this video and subscribing to the channel, because your support helps us continue creating long, educational English content that focuses on understanding rather than emotion. And we would also love to hear from you in the comments, so please tell us where you are listening from and share your thoughts or questions about today's topic, since global power is something that connects people from every region of the world.
Now let us gently introduce the main idea of this section, which is understanding what global power means in the 21st century, because in the past, a world superpower was usually defined as a country with the strongest military, the largest army, or the ability to win wars, while today global power is far more complex and includes economic strength, political influence, technological leadership, cultural reach, and the ability to shape international rules in ways that other countries must consider.
When we use the term world superpower today, we are not only talking about tanks, missiles, or military bases, but rather about a country's overall capacity to influence global stability, international cooperation, economic systems, and long-term development, because power now exists in many forms at the same time, and countries often compete quietly through trade agreements, digital technology, financial systems, diplomatic relationships, and global institutions instead of open confrontation.
This is why it is helpful for English learners to understand the difference between military power, economic power, and influence, since military power refers to a country's ability to defend itself or project force. Economic power describes its role in global trade, finance, and production, and influence is about shaping opinions, decisions, and behaviors of other countries through trust, partnerships, communication, and leadership, rather than direct control.
Another reason global power has become more complex than in the past is that the world is now deeply connected through technology and globalization, which means that decisions made in one major country can quickly affect markets, supply chains, digital platforms, and even daily life in many other countries, creating a situation where power is shared, challenged, and adjusted constantly instead of being fixed or permanent.
Technology plays a major role in this new balance of power, because leadership in areas such as artificial intelligence, digital infrastructure, communication networks, and scientific research can give countries long-term influence without using force, while trade allows nations to build partnerships or dependencies that shape global behavior, and diplomacy helps manage competition in ways that reduce conflict and increase stability.
For English learners, this topic is especially valuable because it introduces important abstract nouns such as power, influence, stability, and competition, which are often used in international news and academic discussions, and by listening carefully to how these words are defined and explained in context, you can improve both your vocabulary and your ability to understand complex ideas in a calm and logical way.
As we continue this episode, Our goal is not to create fear or take political sides, but to help you understand how global power works today, why it matters, and how to talk about it in clear and neutral English so that you can follow international discussions with confidence and use English as a tool for learning, understanding, and connecting with the world, rather than feeling overwhelmed by global headlines.
So once again, thank you for joining us on the English Globe. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where you are listening from and what you think about today's topic. Because your engagement helps this learning community grow, and now that we have built a strong foundation for understanding global power, we can move forward step by step into a deeper and clearer discussion of how world superpowers compete in today's interconnected world. When discussing the role of the United States in today's global system, it is helpful to begin with its economic position, because the U.S. continues to be one of the largest and most influential economies in the world, and this economic strength allows it to play a central role in global trade, international finance, and market stability, meaning that decisions made by U.S. institutions, companies, or policymakers often create effects that are felt far beyond its own borders, influencing prices, investments, employment trends, and economic confidence in many different regions.
That connection is very important to understand, Adam, because the US economy is deeply linked to global supply chains, international trade agreements, and financial systems. So when the United States grows, slows down, or changes its economic policies, other countries often adjust their own strategies in response, which shows how economic power works as a form of global influence rather than direct control, since no country is forced to follow, but many choose to adapt because of shared interests and economic realities.
This is a good example of cause and effect language for English learners, because we can say that because the United States plays a major role in global trade and finance, therefore, its economic decisions often affect international markets, and as a result, the country maintains a strong position in global economic leadership, even when it faces competition from other major economies that are also expanding their influence in different ways.
Alongside economic strength, another key part of US global power is its military presence and network of alliances, which does not simply mean having armed forces, but rather maintaining long-term security partnerships with many countries, especially through formal alliances and defense cooperation. And these relationships allow the United States to contribute to collective security efforts, while also sharing responsibilities with its partners instead of acting alone.
Because of these alliances, the United States often operates as part of a wider security system, and this means that its military power is closely connected to diplomacy, coordination, and shared decision-making, which helps explain why military influence today is not only about strength, but also about trust, reliability, and long-term cooperation between countries that agree on certain rules and security goals.
At the same time, it is important to mention US soft power, which refers to influence that comes from attraction rather than pressure. And this includes areas such as culture, education, and technology, where American universities, research institutions, media, and innovative companies continue to shape global trends, ideas, and professional standards in ways that reach millions of people without any direct political action.
For example, when students from different countries choose to study at U.S. universities, or when people around the world use American-developed technologies and platforms, this creates long-term influence because ideas, values, and professional practices spread naturally. And as a result, the United States maintains a strong global presence through learning, innovation, and cultural exchange rather than through force or formal authority.
However, a balanced and educational discussion must also include current challenges and limitations, because the United States, like all major powers, faces economic competition, political differences at home, and increasing pressure to cooperate with other countries on global issues such as climate change, health, and technology regulation. which shows that leadership today is not absolute, but shared and constantly negotiated.
These challenges demonstrate that global leadership in the modern world requires adaptation, careful policy choices, and cooperation, since no single country can fully control global outcomes. And this reality encourages a shift from dominance toward management, dialogue, and shared responsibility, especially in an international environment that is more connected and complex than in previous decades.
For English learners, this section provides useful vocabulary related to leadership and policy, such as influence, alliances, strategy, cooperation, and responsibility. And it also shows how formal descriptive language can be used to explain a country's role clearly and neutrally, without emotional judgment or political persuasion.
By understanding the United States in this balanced way, listeners can better follow international discussions and news reports, because instead of seeing global power as something simple or aggressive, they can recognize it as a combination of economic systems, security partnerships, cultural influence, and ongoing challenges, all of which interact to shape the country's position in today's global balance.
This calm and structured understanding prepares us to compare different global actors more effectively. And it also helps English learners develop the confidence to discuss complex international topics using clear cause and effect sentences and precise vocabulary, which is exactly the skill we aim to build here on the English globe as we continue exploring how world superpowers compete and cooperate in the modern era.
When we talk about China's position in today's global system, it is useful to focus on its economic development over recent decades, because China's rise has been gradual, strategic, and closely connected to long-term planning rather than sudden change. And this process has transformed the country from a largely inward-focused economy in the past into one of the central players in global trade, manufacturing, and international economic cooperation.
That historical perspective is very important, Adam, because when we compare the past with the present, we can see that over recent decades, China has expanded its role step by increasing production capacity, investing in education and skills, and building strong trade relationships with many regions, which explains why today China is deeply connected to global supply chains and plays a significant role in the movement of goods, resources, and technology across international markets.
Because of this economic growth, China has become one of the world's largest trading nations, and this means that many countries rely on trade with China for manufacturing inputs, consumer goods, or export markets. So as a result, China's economic decisions often have wider global effects, not through direct pressure, but through the natural influence that comes from being an important partner in international trade networks.
Another key element of China's rise is its focus on technology, manufacturing, and large-scale infrastructure projects, which are closely linked to economic development, because advanced manufacturing, digital innovation, and transportation systems help increase efficiency, reduce costs, and strengthen long-term competitiveness, allowing China to move from low-cost production in the past toward more complex and higher-value industries in the present.
Over time, this shift has changed how China is viewed globally, because instead of being seen only as a manufacturing center, it is now also recognized as a major investor in research, digital platforms, renewable energy, and infrastructure development, which supports its broader economic strategy and helps explain how growth today is about systems, planning, and innovation, rather than simple expansion.
Infrastructure projects, in particular, show how economic development and global influence can be connected. Because when transportation routes, ports, or communication systems are built or supported through long-term cooperation, they often create lasting economic relationships, and these relationships can shape trade patterns and regional development without involving military power or direct confrontation.
Diplomacy also plays a central role in China's approach, since its global strategy often emphasizes dialogue, economic cooperation, and long-term partnerships, which means influence is built slowly through agreements, shared projects, and consistent engagement rather than rapid or dramatic actions. And this approach reflects a preference for stability and predictability in international relations.
From a language learning perspective, this gives us a good opportunity to practice time-based explanations, because we can say that in the past, China focused mainly on domestic development. Over recent decades, it expanded its trade and manufacturing capacity, and in recent years it has increased its emphasis on technology, infrastructure, and global cooperation, which helps listeners clearly understand how growth happens over time.
It is also important to explain how China competes on the global stage without direct confrontation, because instead of relying on military presence far from its borders, China often competes through economic scale, long-term investment, technological development, and diplomatic engagement, which allows it to increase influence while avoiding open conflict and maintaining stable international relationships.
This form of competition is quieter and more gradual, but it can be very effective since economic connections tend to last longer than political disagreements, and when countries are linked through trade, investment, and shared projects, cooperation often becomes more practical than confrontation, which changes how global power is expressed in the modern world.
For English learners, this section introduces useful vocabulary related to growth and development, such as expansion, investment, infrastructure, innovation, and long-term planning. And it also shows how to compare past and present using clear structures that explain change without emotion or judgment.
By understanding China's rise in this calm and analytical way, listeners can better follow international discussions and news reports, because they will recognize that global competition today is not only about strength or conflict, but also about economic systems, strategic planning, and gradual influence that develops over time.
This balanced understanding helps prepare us for the next parts of our discussion, where we will continue comparing different global actors while also helping English learners build confidence in explaining complex global developments clearly, logically, and neutrally, which remains one of the main goals of the English globe. When we examine Russia's role in the current global system, it is important to use careful and balanced language, because Russia's influence is often discussed in strong or emotional terms, while an educational approach focuses instead on understanding how the country defines its priorities, how it uses its resources, and how its strategy differs from other major powers in ways that reflect history, geography, and long-term security concerns.
That careful approach really matters, Adam, especially for English learners, because Russia's global position is closely connected to questions of security, and security policies tend to develop from historical experiences and regional realities, which means Russia often places strong emphasis on military readiness and defense capabilities as a way to maintain stability and protect what it considers vital national interests.
In this context, Russia can be described as a country that maintains significant military strength, not necessarily to project power across the entire world, but rather to ensure security within its surrounding regions and to signal that it remains a serious strategic actor, which helps explain why military capability continues to play a central role in Russia's approach to global affairs.
At the same time, it is useful to understand that military power alone does not fully explain Russia's influence, because energy resources, particularly oil and natural gas, tend to play a major role in shaping its relationships with other countries, and these resources often create economic connections that influence political discussions and long-term cooperation.
Because many countries depend on stable energy supplies, Russia's role as a major energy producer can provide geopolitical leverage, meaning that its position in global energy markets allows it to participate in international negotiations with added economic importance, even when its role in other economic sectors may be more limited compared to larger trading economies.
This leads us to an important distinction between regional influence and global influence, since Russia often focuses more strongly on its neighboring regions. where historical ties, security interests, and geographic proximity naturally increase its impact, while its global influence tends to be more selective and concentrated in specific areas such as energy, security discussions, and diplomatic engagement.
When we compare Russia with the United States and China, we can see that Russia competes in a different way because it does not rely primarily on large-scale global trade networks like China, nor does it maintain the same level of worldwide alliances as the United States, but instead tends to use focused strategies that combine military capability, energy resources, and regional diplomacy.
This comparison is helpful for English learners because it shows how the same concept, which is global power, can be expressed through different methods, and it also demonstrates the value of modal verbs such as can, tends to, and often, which allow speakers to describe patterns and tendencies without making absolute or emotional statements.
For example, we can say that Russia tends to prioritize security in its regional environment. It can use energy resources as a tool of influence, and it often approaches global competition through selective engagement rather than broad global leadership. And this type of wording helps keep the discussion factual, balanced, and respectful.
Another important point is that Russia's strategy reflects its view of stability and order, which may differ from other countries, and understanding this difference does not require agreement or disagreement, but rather a clear recognition that global systems include multiple perspectives shaped by history, geography, and national experience.
For listeners who are learning English, this section also demonstrates how to talk about sensitive international topics without strong emotional language, by focusing on description instead of judgment and explanation instead of opinion, which is a valuable skill when discussing global issues in professional or academic contexts.
By approaching Russia's role in this calm and structured way, learners can better understand why global competition today includes different models of power and influence, and how countries choose strategies that match their strengths and priorities rather than following a single global pattern.
This understanding helps us continue building a clearer picture of the modern global balance, where power is not equal or identical across countries, but shaped by different resources, goals, and methods. And as we move forward, this balanced perspective will allow us to compare global actors more thoughtfully and discuss world affairs with clarity and confidence here on the English globe. When we talk about Europe's role in the modern global system, it is very important to understand that Europe does not function as a single country, but rather as a collective group of nations that try to coordinate their economic, political, and diplomatic actions, mainly through the European Union, which acts as a shared framework where member states cooperate while still maintaining their own national identities, priorities, and political systems.
That distinction is essential, Adam, because many people hear the word Europe and imagine one unified power acting with one voice, while in reality, Europe's influence comes from cooperation among many countries, and this cooperation requires constant negotiation, compromise, and dialogue, which means that European power is often slower and more complex than the power of individual states like the United States or China.
The European Union can be described as both an economic and political actor, because economically it represents one of the largest single markets in the world, allowing goods, services, capital, and people to move more freely across borders. And politically, it provides a platform where member states discuss common policies on trade, environment, digital regulation, and international cooperation.
Because of this large shared market, the European Union has significant influence in global trade, since companies and countries that want access to European consumers often need to follow European rules and standards, which shows how regulation itself can become a form of power, even without military force or direct political pressure.
This is a good example of structured comparison language, because while some global powers rely more on military reach or economic scale, Europe often relies on rules, standards, and agreements, meaning that its influence tends to be indirect but long-lasting, especially in areas such as data protection, environmental policy, consumer rights, and product safety.
Diplomacy is another major strength of Europe as a collective power, because European countries have long traditions of negotiation and multilateral cooperation, and when they act together, they can play an important role in international organizations, peace talks, and global problem-solving efforts, particularly in areas where dialogue and compromise are more effective than confrontation.
However, this collective strength also depends heavily on cooperation and consensus, which means that major decisions often require agreement among many different governments, each with its own political pressures and public opinions, and as a result, Europe can sometimes move more slowly or appear less decisive compared to countries where decisions are made by a single central authority.
This reliance on consensus highlights an important concept for English learners, which is group dynamics, because Europe's power is shaped by how well its members work together, how disagreements are managed, and how shared goals are balanced with national interests. And these dynamics help explain both Europe's strengths and its limitations.
Internal differences are a natural part of this system, since European countries differ in economic size, historical experience, security priorities, and political culture, and these differences can lead to debates about budget responsibilities, foreign policy direction, and the balance between national control and collective decision-making.
At the same time, Europe also faces external challenges that test its unity, such as global economic competition, technological change, energy security, and shifting geopolitical relationships. And responding to these challenges often requires even stronger coordination, which can be difficult but also demonstrates why collective action remains central to Europe's global role.
When we compare Europe with other global actors, we can say that Europe's influence often comes from its ability to set norms and promote cooperation, rather than from direct confrontation or rapid strategic moves, and this comparison helps English learners understand that power does not always look the same in every context.
For language learners, this section introduces useful collective nouns and expressions, such as the European Union, member states, institutions, and alliances, and it also provides examples of how to explain cooperation and disagreement clearly, using neutral and formal language that is suitable for academic or professional discussions.
By learning how to describe Europe as a group with shared goals and internal differences, listeners can improve their ability to discuss complex organizations in English, especially when those organizations operate through negotiation rather than command, which is a common feature of modern international relations.
Understanding Europe as a collective power also helps listeners see why global balance today depends not only on individual countries, but also on groups and institutions that work together over time, sometimes slowly and imperfectly, but often with lasting impact on global rules and stability.
This perspective prepares us to better understand global competition as a system where different models of power exist side by side, and as we continue this podcast on the English Globe, this understanding will help English learners follow international discussions with greater clarity, confidence, and a deeper awareness of how cooperation and limitation can exist at the same time in global affairs. When people think about competition between major powers, they often imagine direct military conflict, yet in today's global system, competition is usually expressed through quieter and more complex methods, because economic systems, technological development, and influence over information have become the primary ways in which countries seek advantage, stability, and long-term leadership without using force or creating open confrontation.
That shift is very important to understand, Adam, because it shows how competition has moved into areas that affect everyday life, such as trade, technology, and media. And by focusing on these areas, countries can protect their interests, expand their influence, and respond to rivals in ways that are indirect, gradual, and often difficult to notice unless the process is explained. step by step.
One of the most common forms of modern competition is trade competition, where economic pressure can be applied through tariffs, regulations, investment policies, or trade agreements. And these tools are used to protect domestic industries, influence market behavior, or encourage changes in economic practices, all without involving military action or security threats.
In formal language, this process can be explained using the passive voice. For example, trade rules are adjusted, markets are influenced, or supply chains are reshaped, which helps keep the discussion neutral and focused on outcomes rather than on blame. And this style is often used in academic and professional discussions about economics and global policy.
Because global economies are deeply connected, even small changes in trade policy can create wider effects, since prices may be affected, production may be shifted, and investment decisions may be reconsidered, showing how economic competition works through cause and effect, rather than direct control, and why economic strength is such a central part of modern global power.
Technology leadership is another major area of competition, because innovation in fields such as artificial intelligence, digital infrastructure, renewable energy, and advanced manufacturing can shape future economic growth and security. And as a result, research funding is increased, regulations are developed, and partnerships are formed to support long-term technological advantage.
Over time, technological standards are established, platforms are adopted, and systems are integrated into daily life, which means that influence is created not through force, but through design, efficiency, and widespread use. And this explains why technology competition tends to be strategic, long-term, and closely linked to education and investment.
Information and media also play a growing role in modern competition, because global narratives are shaped by how events are explained, discussed, and understood, and through international media, digital platforms, and public communication. Perspectives are shared, values are highlighted, and influence is built through attention rather than authority.
This does not mean that information competition is about simple control, but rather about visibility and credibility. Since messages are amplified, stories are framed, and opinions are influenced in subtle ways, and understanding this process helps English learners recognize why language, tone, and word choice matter so much in global discussions.
Another reason competition today is often indirect is that direct confrontation tends to create high costs and unpredictable outcomes, while economic and technological competition allows countries to test strategies, adjust policies, and respond gradually, making it a more flexible and manageable approach in an interconnected world.
For English learners, this section offers useful vocabulary related to economics and technology, such as innovation, regulation, investment, infrastructure, supply chains, and digital platforms. And it also demonstrates how complex processes can be explained clearly by organizing ideas in logical order.
By listening to these explanations, learners can practice understanding formal language that is commonly used in international news and professional analysis, and they can also improve their ability to describe systems and processes using neutral wording and passive structures.
Understanding competition without war helps listeners move beyond dramatic headlines and see global relations as a series of strategic choices made over time, where influence is built through economics, technology, and communication, rather than through direct conflict.
This perspective supports our broader goal here on the English Globe, which is to help English learners develop the skills to discuss complex global topics calmly, accurately, and confidently, while recognizing that modern competition is often quiet, indirect, and deeply connected to everyday economic and technological realities.
When we look at how global power is balanced today, it becomes clear that no major country operates completely on its own, because alliances, partnerships, and global networks play a central role in shaping international relationships, and through cooperation with others, countries can increase their security, economic opportunities, and political influence in ways that would be difficult to achieve independently.
That is a key point, Adam, because alliances such as NATO and various trade partnerships are not only about shared defense or economic benefit, but also about trust, shared rules, and long-term commitment. And if countries believe that their partners will cooperate during difficult situations, stability is more likely to be maintained across regions.
In the case of formal alliances, clear agreements are established, responsibilities are defined, and expectations are written into official frameworks, which means that cooperation is organized and predictable. And if a challenge appears, members often respond together, creating a collective effect that is stronger than individual action.
Trade partnerships work in a similar way, because when countries agree to trade rules, investment protections, or shared standards, economic relationships become more stable. And if markets are connected through long-term agreements, sudden disruptions can often be reduced or managed more effectively.
At the same time, it is useful to distinguish between formal alliances and strategic partnerships, since strategic partnerships are often more flexible and less binding, allowing countries to cooperate in specific areas such as technology, energy, or education without committing to full political or military alignment.
This distinction helps explain how cooperation can take many forms. Because if a country wants to work with others while maintaining independence, a strategic partnership may be preferred. Whereas if long-term security guarantees are needed, a formal alliance may be considered more suitable.
Another important aspect of global networks is the role of smaller countries, which are sometimes seen as passive. But in reality, they can influence larger powers by offering strategic locations, specialized resources, diplomatic support, or access to regional markets, and if these contributions are valued, smaller states can gain a meaningful voice in international discussions.
This shows how influence does not always depend on size, because if cooperation is managed carefully, even smaller actors can shape decisions, encourage dialogue, or help balance competition between larger powers, especially within multilateral institutions and regional organizations.
For English learners, this part of the discussion offers many useful relationship-related words, such as alliances, partnerships, cooperation, commitment, and coordination, which are commonly used when explaining international relations in a professional and neutral way.
It also provides a good opportunity to practice conditional sentences. For example, if countries cooperate effectively, stability can be improved. Or if partnerships are based on trust, long-term benefits are more likely, which helps learners express possibilities and outcomes clearly.
One of the most interesting aspects of modern global relations is the balance between cooperation and competition, because countries often work together in some areas while competing in others. And if this balance is managed carefully, conflict can be reduced while progress continues.
This balanced approach requires polite and analytical discussion, since strong language or emotional reactions can damage trust, while careful wording encourages dialogue, understanding, and long-term problem-solving, especially when global issues affect many countries at the same time.
By understanding alliances and partnerships as dynamic systems rather than fixed positions, listeners can better follow international developments and recognize why cooperation remains essential even when competition exists.
This understanding also helps English learners develop confidence in discussing global topics, because they learn how to describe relationships, explain conditions, and express analysis politely and clearly, which supports both language growth and global awareness.
As we continue our discussion on the English globe, this section reminds us that global balance is not created by power alone, but by networks of cooperation that connect countries, manage competition, and help maintain stability in an increasingly interconnected world. When we discuss global competition between major powers, it is very important to move away from abstract ideas and clearly explain how these large international processes quietly shape everyday life, because decisions made at the global level often influence prices, jobs, technology, and opportunities in ways that people experience daily, even if they are not always aware of the international connections behind those changes.
That connection is especially important for English learners to understand, Adam, because global competition is not something that exists only in news headlines or political discussions, but something that directly affects how much people pay for food, fuel, and technology, how companies decide where to invest or hire workers, and how quickly new products or digital services become available in different parts of the world.
For example, when major economies compete through trade policies or supply chains are adjusted due to global competition, prices can rise or fall depending on production costs, transportation routes, and market access, which means that a decision made thousands of kilometers away can influence the cost of everyday items in local shops, showing how closely global systems and local experiences are connected.
Jobs are also affected by this competition because when countries invest in certain industries, protect domestic markets, or develop new technologies, companies may expand, relocate, or change their hiring strategies. And as a result, workers may find new opportunities in some sectors while facing challenges in others, which demonstrates that global competition often reshapes labor markets gradually rather than suddenly.
Technology is another area where global competition is strongly felt, because competition in innovation encourages faster development of digital tools, communication platforms, and advanced devices. And while this often brings convenience and efficiency to everyday life, it also requires people to continuously adapt, learn new skills, and understand how technology connects them to global systems.
Travel and education are also closely linked to global competition, since international agreements, visa policies, educational exchanges, and transportation networks are influenced by diplomatic relationships and economic priorities, meaning that students, professionals, and travelers experience global power dynamics through opportunities to study abroad, work internationally, or communicate across borders.
Global communication has become especially important because modern competition depends heavily on information flow, digital platforms, and cross-cultural interaction, which means that people today are more connected than ever before, and language, especially English, plays a central role in helping individuals participate in global conversations, access information, and build international connections.
This is why understanding world affairs matters so much for English learners, because learning English is not only about grammar or vocabulary, but also about understanding the global context in which the language is used. And when learners understand international topics, they are better prepared to follow news, engage in discussions, and use English confidently in professional or academic environments.
Media consumption is another area where global competition becomes visible, because news coverage, online platforms, and digital content often reflect global narratives shaped by economic interests, technological competition, and international relationships. And learning how to read or listen critically helps people avoid confusion and develop a clearer, more balanced understanding of world events. For English learners, this means practicing how to connect global events to local experiences, such as explaining how international trade affects local prices, how technological competition influences job skills, or how diplomatic relationships shape travel and education opportunities, which strengthens both language ability and global awareness at the same time. Using practical vocabulary like prices, employment, skills, technology, communication, and media, learners can describe real-life situations clearly, while also practicing longer explanations that show cause and effect relationships between global decisions and everyday outcomes.
Clear examples are especially helpful because when learners can say that global competition influences the cost of smartphones, the availability of online jobs, or the spread of digital education, they are not only improving their English, but also developing the ability to explain complex ideas in a simple and logical way.
Understanding these global to local connections helps listeners see that world affairs are not distant or irrelevant, but part of daily life, shaping choices, opportunities, and challenges in subtle but meaningful ways, which makes learning about global competition both practical and valuable.
This perspective supports the main goal of the English Globe, because by connecting international topics to real experiences, English learners gain confidence, clarity, and motivation to continue listening, learning, and using English as a tool to understand the world more deeply and thoughtfully.
When discussing topics like global power, international competition, or the roles of superpowers, it is essential to use language that is clear, neutral, and responsible, because words shape perception. And when emotional or exaggerated expressions are used, listeners may misunderstand the actual situation or develop unnecessary fear or bias, which is especially important for English learners who are practicing professional or academic communication in a second language.
Exactly, Adam. Because the way we speak about sensitive international topics matters just as much as the information itself, and neutral language helps listeners focus on facts, analysis, and context, rather than being distracted by strong opinions, sensational phrasing, or emotionally charged vocabulary, which is why using calm and precise wording is always recommended in educational and professional discussions.
One key principle is understanding the difference between neutral language and emotional language. Neutral language describes actions, policies, and outcomes without judgment, while emotional language uses words that convey anger, fear, or excitement, often exaggerating events. For example, instead of saying, "The world is on the brink of disaster because of these countries," a neutral phrasing would be, "International competition affects multiple countries' policies and global stability in complex ways," which is factual, precise, and professional.
Avoiding exaggeration and fear-based words is especially important for English learners, because when you use overly dramatic language, it can create confusion or misunderstandings for your listeners, while factual and descriptive language ensures that your statements are credible and that you are seen as an informed and responsible speaker, which is particularly valuable in educational or academic contexts.
Useful phrases are also very important for structuring explanations. For example, you can say, "It is observed that," "research suggests that," "many analysts argue that," or "data indicates that," which allows you to present information without inserting personal opinion, and this approach also introduces learners to formal English patterns commonly used in journalism, research, and international discussion.
Polite disagreement is another skill to practice. In professional conversations, it is often necessary to acknowledge other perspectives without dismissing them. For instance, saying, while some experts emphasize economic influence, it can also be argued that military presence plays a complementary role, or this view is valid. However, it is important to consider additional factors such as technology and diplomacy. Using this style ensures that learners can discuss sensitive topics thoughtfully and respectfully.
For English learners, sentence tone control is crucial. Sentences should be structured to convey information confidently without sounding aggressive, alarmist, or judgmental. Using modal verbs like can, may, tends to, or often allows you to indicate probability and trends rather than absolute certainty, which is more accurate and appropriate for complex global topics where multiple outcomes are possible.
Academic-style vocabulary is another focus, because words such as influence, stability, competition, policy, framework, and cooperation provide precision and clarity, helping learners convey complex ideas in a concise professional manner. And these words are frequently used in international relations, economics, and political science discussions.
Another useful strategy is to break complex ideas into smaller, logical steps. For example, first, a country's economic policies can affect international trade. Second, these trade patterns influence global markets. Third, as a result, prices and opportunities for other countries may change. This step-by-step structure helps learners maintain clarity while discussing sensitive or complicated topics in English.
It is also helpful to provide context for every statement. Instead of presenting isolated facts or opinions, learners can use phrases such as, "Historically, this has been observed. In recent years, trends suggest," or, "According to analysts, the impact can be significant," which anchors statements in evidence and context, making them both understandable and professional.
When you combine all of these techniques, neutral language, careful sentence tone, polite disagreement, structured explanations, and academic vocabulary, you create a style of speaking that is not only professional and educational but also approachable for a global audience, which is exactly what we aim to practice here on the English Globe.
This approach helps English learners gain confidence when discussing complex topics like global power, because it allows them to explain ideas clearly without exaggeration, maintain credibility, and engage in thoughtful conversations even on sensitive issues, all while improving vocabulary, sentence structure, and overall fluency.
By mastering these strategies, learners can participate in discussions, write essays, or make presentations about international relations with professionalism and clarity, ensuring that their English communicates understanding, analysis, and responsibility, rather than fear, bias, or oversimplification.
In short, using neutral and precise English enables learners not only to describe global competition accurately, but also to build skills that are essential for professional, academic, and cross-cultural communication. And this practice becomes increasingly valuable as they continue exploring international topics with confidence and clarity on the English Globe.
As we move beyond understanding today's global power structure, it is important to consider what the future might hold for international relations and how shifts in leadership, technology, and economics could shape the world in the coming decades, because predicting trends helps us understand potential challenges, opportunities, and the ways in which ordinary people will continue to experience the effects of global competition in their daily lives.
That's a great point, Adam. The future of global power will likely involve increased complexity because emerging economies, technological innovation, climate change, and shifting alliances are all influencing how countries interact. And this means that the balance of influence among the US, China, Russia, and Europe may evolve in ways that require careful observation, analytical thinking, and continuous learning to understand.
For example, technology will continue to play a crucial role in shaping power dynamics, because leadership in areas like artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and digital infrastructure can provide countries with new advantages. And if these technological trends continue, nations that innovate and adapt quickly are more likely to strengthen their influence both regionally and globally.
Similarly, alliances and partnerships will remain critical, because no country operates in isolation. And if nations build strong networks based on trust, shared values, and economic cooperation, they will be better equipped to face challenges such as economic crises, cyber threats, or international conflicts, which reinforces the idea that collaboration is as important as competition in the modern world.
Climate change and sustainability are also becoming major factors in global influence, because countries that develop effective solutions for renewable energy, resource management, and environmental protection can gain both economic and diplomatic advantages. And this demonstrates how global competition increasingly intersects with scientific knowledge, innovation, and long-term planning rather than immediate military or economic dominance alone.
From a language learning perspective, this section provides an opportunity to practice future tense structures, conditional sentences, and predictive language, such as, if countries continue to invest in technology, they will likely increase influence, or emerging partnerships may shape the balance of power in the coming decades, which is very useful for academic or professional English.
It is also important to reflect on how these changes may affect everyday life, because developments in technology, trade, and diplomacy will continue to influence jobs, education, communication, and international travel. And if listeners understand these trends, they can make more informed decisions and better connect global events to local experiences.
English learners can also improve vocabulary by exploring terms such as emerging economies, innovation, sustainability, digital infrastructure, cybersecurity, climate policy, and future trends, which are commonly used in discussions about international relations, technology, and global planning, helping learners describe complex ideas clearly and professionally.
By thinking about the future of global power, listeners are encouraged not only to expand their English skills, but also to develop critical thinking, global awareness, and the ability to explain complex issues in a structured and neutral manner, which are key skills for academic, professional, and everyday communication.
Ultimately, the goal of understanding future trends is to foster a sense of preparedness and curiosity so that learners can confidently follow international developments, discuss potential outcomes, and use English to communicate ideas clearly, logically, and responsibly, which aligns perfectly with the mission of the English globe.
Looking ahead, it becomes clear that global power will not be static, but dynamic, influenced by economics, technology, diplomacy, and social change. And by observing these patterns and practicing neutral, structured English, learners can remain informed, engaged, and capable of participating in global conversations in a professional and confident manner.
This forward-looking perspective encourages continuous learning, both in English and in understanding world affairs, showing that language and knowledge are tools that work together to help learners navigate the complexities of the modern world, think critically about future developments, and communicate effectively across cultures and borders.
By integrating insights about the future with the vocabulary, sentence structures, and neutral expressions we have practiced in this podcast, listeners can strengthen both language and analytical skills, preparing them to approach global topics thoughtfully, discuss potential scenarios with clarity, and use English as a bridge to understand the evolving international landscape. As we reach the conclusion of today's discussion on global power and competition, it is helpful to summarize the main points about the roles of the United States, China, Russia, and Europe, while keeping in mind that the purpose of this overview is to understand balance and influence rather than to create fear or drama, because learning about international relations can improve both knowledge and English skills when approached calmly and thoughtfully.
That's right, Adam. Starting with the United States, we can recall that its global influence is built on a combination of economic strength, technological innovation, military alliances, and cultural soft power, which allows it to shape global trade, security, and ideas in ways that reach many countries, while also facing challenges from other emerging powers and internal political dynamics, showing that power is complex and multifaceted.
China's rise, on the other hand, has been primarily economic, technological, and strategic, with its long-term planning, large-scale infrastructure projects, and integration into global trade networks, allowing it to expand influence gradually, without direct confrontation, which demonstrates how sustained growth and investment can become a form of soft power and global presence over time.
Russia's approach differs in that it tends to prioritize military strength, regional security, and energy resources as tools of influence, often focusing on its surrounding regions, which allows it to compete strategically and assert its role in specific areas without the need for global economic dominance, highlighting the different strategies countries use depending on their resources and priorities.
Europe, particularly through the European Union, represents a collective approach, relying on cooperation, shared rules, and consensus to create influence in trade, regulation, and diplomacy, which shows that power can be distributed across multiple countries and that collaboration can provide long-term stability, even when individual states have differing interests or perspectives.
As English learners, It is also useful to review some of the key vocabulary we have used throughout this podcast, including influence, alliances, cooperation, competition, strategic, soft power, infrastructure, diplomacy, regulation, economic growth, innovation, and stability. Because these words allow us to describe global affairs with clarity, precision, and neutrality.
Reflecting on this episode, we can see that understanding global competition is not about focusing on conflict, but about recognizing the patterns, strategies, and relationships that shape international events. And by practicing long listening sessions in English, learners can improve comprehension, vocabulary, and confidence in discussing complex topics.
Learning English through global topics also adds value because it connects language skills with real-world knowledge, allowing learners to participate in informed discussions, read international news, and write summaries or essays using professional vocabulary and clear structures, which strengthens both language ability and global awareness simultaneously.
Summarizing skills are essential in this context, because when learners can condense complex information into clear, neutral sentences, they can communicate effectively in professional, academic, or social situations, while also demonstrating understanding of nuanced concepts like international balance, diplomacy, and economic interdependence.
Reflection language is equally important because it allows learners to think critically about what they have learned, connect it to previous knowledge, and express their own opinions carefully. For example, by using phrases like, "This shows that," "We can see that," or "It is clear that," which make explanations sound structured, professional, and confident.
We hope that listeners will continue practicing English through long listening exercises, reflecting on global topics, and applying neutral, structured language in their own discussions, because this combination of language practice and awareness of international dynamics is one of the most effective ways to develop confidence, fluency, and professional communication skills on the English globe.
By keeping these ideas in mind and integrating them into daily learning, English learners can improve their understanding of complex global systems, enhance vocabulary, strengthen analytical thinking, and ultimately become more capable and confident speakers, readers, and listeners ready to engage with the world in a calm, informed, and professional manner.